The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I want to go through that process of when you deposit dollars with your bank. Again, it's just going to come from a liability of another commercial bank, because unless you're just going down there with physical dollars, then the banks, see, in my mind, the banks already have the bank reserves. So let's say I go down tomorrow morning and deposit that $1,000 with Wells Fargo, or I just move it from another account. So it's one bank's liability. Now it's becoming a liability of Wells Fargo. I don't see Wells Fargo tomorrow morning immediately, or maybe at the close of the day, buying T-bills with that and then using that as the asset to back up the liability. I see what happens is when I deposit that $1,000 as their new liability at the end of the day, or in real time, whatever, the Fed is simply taking the bank reserves from the bank that originally had the liability and moving it down or into Wells Fargo's reserve account, and that's the asset that backs up the liability. I think what you're saying is there's a step in between there, where are you getting that?
Yeah. So again, it's because not all bank deposits are liability of the Fed. It's not until the QE process occurs that they move to the Fed's balance sheet. And that's simply because if you look at, if we had a number for what the total bank deposits were, which we could say is the M2.
Does it say it's 20 trillion?
Right. The Fed's balance sheet is 8 trillion. So where's the other 12?
It's lending. It's loans.
No, not necessarily. In fact, it's not loans. In fact, there isn't enough loans. So it's actually Treasury securities. I'll need to send this to you, but there's a quarterly report from the U.S. Treasury itself that actually shows that customer deposits and corporate deposits have a certain maturity. One's at 3 and one's at 5. Probably customers at 3, corporates at 5 maturity, and that the banks actually go buy Treasury securities to match that duration. So
we're just talking about the difference between base money and broad money. Right. So broad money is going to be larger naturally, because they're going to lend using the base money. They're not lending out the base money, but they're just using that to back up the loans.
So think of it this way, right? When a deposit comes in, they can either lend against it to create the interest to pay the depositor, or they buy a Treasury security. It's not until quantitative easing comes along and moves those Treasury securities to the Fed's balance sheet does it become a liability of the Fed. If quantitative easing wasn't occurring, let's say the Fed had balance sheet was 0, right? The system still works the way you think it does. It just, the liabilities are in a different place.
Right. So, but let's just say that right now with the banking system flush with reserves.
Yeah.
When I'm going down to make that deposit again with Wells Fargo, if they already have, let's just assume $1 trillion worth of reserves on their balance sheet, why are they going out and buying the T-bill first? Why aren't they just transferring the bank reserves if they already have them?
Well, because they might not have them. Because again, there's the M2 only looks at money inside the system. So if you look at a typical Treasury auction, somewhere between 50 to 67% comes from foreign sources. Those aren't bank reserves. That's cash. So again, Bank of China, Bank of Japan comes and buys Treasury securities. That cash enters the system and it's not reserved yet. So you're thinking of a system as a closed system, but because there's dollars outside in the euro dollar system, we have to account for that. That's where it starts to get confusing. I get where you're at. I totally get where you're at. I'm trying to get you to where I'm at, but I'm having a little bit of trouble doing it.
Yeah. Because if I've got, when I'm looking at and this gets very, very wonkish here and nerdy and geeky, but when I'm looking at dollars coming in, then I'm looking at a foreign bank, let's say in the Cayman Islands, something like that, to use that. They're going to have a counterparty. So when I wire money, they've got a counterparty that where the bank that's the or intermediary bank is involved with the transaction, because they're the ones that have the account with the Fed. Therefore, they've got the bank reserves. And I don't think those bank reserves need to as far as those dollar bank reserves, need to get outside of the system in order for the euro dollar system to actually function. In the Cayman Islands, I don't think they actually need those bank reserves to create dollar denominated loans, especially if the loans that they're creating are going to customers that are at the same bank, because then they don't have to transfer any asset to another bank to match up with the liability, because they're not transferring the liability in the first place. And again, for the audience, I apologize, because this is getting super nerdy. This is about as deep as you can possibly go right here.
Let's maybe simplify it in the way people would understand, right? Because it is important to understand that if the entire global system was reserved, then everything you're saying is perfectly correct. The problem is it's not, and we have this weird mechanism. So let's say that you and I are going to go out and buy a foreign car, right? So we go out and we co-sign on a loan and we get dollars that in the U.S. banking system are backed by a reserve somewhere. And we go and buy that foreign car. Well, that bank over there probably doesn't take reserves. It wants cash, because the manufacturer of that car can't pay its employees in cash because the foreign banking system doesn't work that way. They're not using reserves. So that becomes cash outside the system. Now, how does that cash eventually flow back? Well, that auto manufacturer can't pay its employees in dollars because they want foreign currency. So they have to go convert it to, with, say, their bank, who they bank with. Well, that bank has dollars and it has local currency, so it converts it. But they don't need all the dollars, so they convert it with the foreign central bank, their central bank, to get local currency, because the foreign central bank can create all the foreign currency it wants. Now, the foreign central bank has dollars piling up that are not backed by reserves. They're just piling up, and that becomes inflationary, so they need to get rid of them. So they go to a Treasury auction and buy debt and give the Treasury dollars. Now they've got treasuries on their balance sheet, which is normal, which is exactly as Jeff would say is how the euro dollar system should work. And now the Treasury's got effectively naked dollars that aren't backed by reserves. And then the primary dealer banks come along and start converting them to reserves by auctioning them off. So it gets really deep and wonky here, but it's
what I need to think, and for the viewers, this is the last thing. We'll move on here.
Well, what we need is a whiteboard. We need to get the whiteboard out.
I'm thinking through, if there's naked dollars, that means, to use your term, I think that's a good way to think through it. That means that they're just transferring liabilities. So I'm just trying, what are the assets? Because they've got to transfer, when you're buying that car, those dollars are just liabilities of a bank. So what are they transferring in addition to those liabilities? There's got to be an asset transfer as well.
Well, or think about this way. How about your local credit union who does not participate in the commercial banking reserve system?
But they got that intermediary bank.
They can't take reserves. So let's say that I bank at a local credit union and you bank at one of the major commercials, and you send me money. My bank can't accept bank reserves of any form. They don't participate.
Then what's their asset?
They don't. Their customer. They usually,
because if I'm transferring from Wells Fargo to a credit union, let's say, because Wells Fargo is transferring them that liability, so they can't. They got to transfer them an asset as well.
So what does the credit union do? Well, it goes out and does car loans and other type of loans to create to back that money, but it's not a Treasury or a Fed liability at that point.
Okay, all right. We're going to leave it at that, guys.
Lost everybody.
Yeah, I know. So, but for those who are still here, I think they're really going to appreciate that conversation, because that is the deep dive of all deep dives right there.
yeah, I think we went way far deeper than either of us thought we were going today. But what your comments are going to say is get the whiteboard out and bring him back.
Yeah, which we really should do on that, Steve.